This is going to be a really, I think, a remarkable panel for all of us, and we're all so grateful at the outset for the bravery and articulateness that we're undoubtedly here in terms of the stories that each of these folks have to tell about their own experiences. My name is Rod Heiss. I'm a parent. I'm a member of the coalition and a member of the Board of Education as well. I'm here to tell you just about 2 or 3 things before Jen introduces the panel and we really dive into things. I wanted to give you a little bit of historical background. This panel really had its roots in a special school board committee meeting that we had last July. And those roots were really set firmly in place when a person by the name of Jennifer Schiffner, who was sitting right over about where Brian was, stood up and began to tell her story. And by the time she was done telling her story, there wasn't a person in the room who hadn't been profoundly affected by what they heard, by her courage, by the very plain way in which she had very directly talked about the experiences that she had. And I can speak for myself, probably for just about anyone else there. It really was an inspiring thing that Jen did just about a year ago. And so that carried over into this meeting that we had in August when community folks and school folks got together to compare notes and to build priorities on both the school side and the community side for how we continue to address mental health and wellness in our community. And one of the 3 community goals that came out of that meeting was a goal that Jen really championed from the beginning. And that is to create places, to create events, to create panels like the one that we're hosting tonight, where people who live with mental illness are able to very freely talk about their experiences so that we all can learn in a really, really meaningful way from them and from their experiences. And so that carried forward to the planning for this night, of course, and I'm actually pretty full of superlatives to begin with, but this is a really profoundly moving thing that is going to happen in this room tonight. The courage, I think, that we're going to see, the learning that all of us have the opportunity to embrace, and what we can do with that learning, with that inspiration, as we go out tonight from this place into our places of work, and into our homes, into the other organizations that we're involved with, so that we can touch other people, so that we can be an extension of this panel tonight. So I'm really excited for the panel to begin, despite the fact that I've talked longer than I should have. And I'll leave it to Jen to introduce the rest of the panel. Thanks so much, Jen, for the inspiration that you are.
Okay, so as Rod mentioned, I'm Jen Schiffner. I have lived in Mount Horeb since 2002 with my hubby, who's back there in the corner. And we have 2 children, a 4th grader and a 6th grader. I can't believe I'm saying that at this point, but we're headed to middle school this next year. I am very appreciative to all of you for being here, and to our community for being open to discussing these kinds of things and to getting things out in the open so that we can treat mental health like any other part of health. It's just a different part of the brain. You know, whether you have an aneurysm, okay, we talk about it. If you have seizure disorder, we talk about it. If you have dementia, we talk about it. If you have a mental illness, and suddenly it's kind of like back when nobody would say the word cancer. And we don't need to whisper it. It's just part of health. We need to learn how to manage it. So a couple things here quickly before we get too much farther. The first is that, as you saw in the door when you came in, hopefully, this is being videotaped. Hopefully we can use it as a resource for our high schoolers, for our community, and so forth. The camera will be only on the panel, but I do ask if you need to leave the room at any point to go out the side that you're sitting on so that you don't cross the camera. I don't think we have anyone under the age of 14 in here, so we're good. Okay, a couple quick easy things. Obviously, we ask that everybody respect each other, our moderators, our panel. I will say our panel is going to reserve the right to not answer a question if they don't feel comfortable with it. And that's just, we all have our boundaries and our safety needs as well. And then we also ask, just because we have our 2 moderators with microphones, that you not ask questions of each other, because we won't have everything on audio. We've got our audio for the table, and we have our audio for the 2 moderators. But if we start talking back and forth, we may not catch things on the audio for the videotape. Finally, you should have 2 things on your chair. Those are yours to keep. One is a bookmark, which has a quote on it that I find extremely pertinent to our particular community. And that is, when I is changed to we, even illness becomes wellness. And wellness is a community issue. So the other piece is something that I had put together after I'd gone through a crisis last year, and just thought, people don't always know how to help. So I put it together, and the response was amazing. I got phone calls, I got cards in the mail, I got private messages, just people going, hey, I deal with this too, and this was helpful. Or, hey, I want to give this to my mom because she doesn't know how to help, and she's always been asking, and I don't know how to verbalize it. So that is yours, just to stick on your fridge or wherever you want to put it. So then I'm quickly going to go through my story and the story, just touch on stories from our panel, and then as we answer questions, we'll get deeper to their particular experiences. So for me, I have obsessive compulsive disorder. Started in 2nd grade, and wasn't diagnosed until early 20s. I knew at 17 what it was. I watched 2020. I figured out, oh hey, that looks familiar. It's not your typical Hollywood kind of OCD. I hate how Hollywood portrays OCD. I don't wash my hands 18 times a day. I don't care how your pencils look. My house isn't nitpicky clean or anything like that. But I thrived for many years. I went to Mayo for exposure therapy and got rid of the anxiety part that was so crippling for me, that went along with the OCD. I still have anxiety, but it's not crippling the way it was before. Then after we had our daughter, postpartum depression hit. And I knew the second it hit what it was, and I went to my doctor and we talked about it. Went back on medication. Then when we had our son, I had to get off the medication very quickly, which was not a good situation for me. And then thrived for many years. Found things that worked for me. And then for whatever reason last spring, things went sideways very quickly and disastrously. It was not good. And right about a year ago, right after Memorial Day, it almost killed me. And I was able to go back on meds appropriately, and the day they kicked in was like a light switch. And it sounds silly, but literally, as soon as it kicked in for me, and it is the only one that works for me. I've tried many, as I think we have someone else here that has tried many, many. But that's my path. That's what works for me. When we had the loss of so many lives last year, and particularly when we got to July, and we lost a 4th grader, my scars were still pretty raw. But I thought, and I knew this particular kid, and I knew that if we were going to have a community discussion about this, we had to inform it from the inside. We had to have those of us who are willing and comfortable to share our story, share what we can about how to successfully manage these issues. So that's my personal story. I remember when we set this up, somebody said to me, well, what do you hope to get out of it? It's not going to fix anything. And I remember thinking that it so beautifully illustrated the point and completely missed the point all at the same time, because we're not broken. But we live in a society that tends to not like unfiltered or blemished or less than, and our instincts to fix kick in really fast. But the goal isn't to fix it. The goal is, as you will see with all of us here, is to manage our challenges appropriately. And if you can do that, if you can learn how to do that, you can find the joy in life. And you can figure out, okay, this is how we move forward. So luckily, I was gifted with these people behind me who I'm extremely proud of for being willing to share their stories. And all of our experiences, whether they're past or current or whatever, they're all very different. But again, we aren't broken. There's nothing wrong with us. But we learn how to manage our challenges and share what we've learned. So, let's see. Without further ado, I am going to introduce, I'll start down here with Heidi. So this is Heidi Brown. She is a married mother of 3 wonderful teenagers, and she works full-time at a local medical device company. She was diagnosed with postpartum depression when her twins, who are now juniors, were 6 months old. At that time, her depression was treated with antidepressants until shortly before she became pregnant with her daughter, who is now an 8th grader. 4 months after she was born, the postpartum depression returned, and she was placed back on antidepressants. And it finally became evident that the postpartum depression was not going to get better, and the diagnosis eventually turned into major depressive disorder. Over the years, she's had only short-term success with most of the antidepressants she's been on, and she estimates that at 30 to 40 different meds. Let's see, at the time that her doctor went through that whole list, he noted that she had treatment-resistant depression, and there was probably not much more that they could do in terms of medication. So let's see, she says, I'm reading her description of it because she's much more eloquent in it than I am. So they discussed electroconvulsive therapy, also known as ECT, as an option. And after one kind of crisis that she went through, finally they decided, she and her husband decided that was the route they needed to go. She did so in October 2017. In December, went back on one of the medications that had helped. And in February, her doctor pronounced her in remission. 2018, yes. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
She says she's thrilled to report that she's been pretty stable since, and in terms of the depression, with some anxiety issues and stress which seem to come and go but are fairly manageable. And she attributes her current health to excellent doctors, both a psychiatrist and psychologist, but she would absolutely not be here today if it wasn't for her incredible husband. I will not point out. I will put my husband on the hotspot and point him out. I will not point hers out. But she wants to share this because she has 3 incredible kids. This runs in their family, and she wants them to be aware of that, what to look out for, be able to talk about it early and often, and to know that there's always something that will help. Let's see, the trifecta of her crisis in late 2017 and subsequent month of ECT sessions, having 2 teenagers at the high school at the time that we lost Matt Slind, and losing 3 more youth since then, has made it even more obvious to her that as a community, we need to remove the stigma of mental illness, and the way we do it is by talking about it. Then I'm going to move on to, actually I'm going to go right down the line here. This is Caitlin Mellon, and Caitlin recently graduated from UW-Madison's MSW program with an emphasis in mental health. Her passion for breaking down stigma and opening up the conversation about mental illness comes from her experience living with depression and anxiety that were diagnosed while she was a senior in high school. The girl who was typically known as the happy one was suddenly in a place where she didn't know how to cope with life. Adjusting to these diagnoses was difficult for Caitlin as she struggled to navigate the road to recovery. In her professional career, she shares her experiences and resources available with students at schools across the country. And I have to...
County.
Oh, county, I'm sorry. She'll get there. She'll get there. She's young. I think this particularly resonates well with our high school students. I think so many of them go through issues like what Caitlin's going through. I don't know what this is. I'm a happy kid. What's going on. So I think her experiences will be very beneficial to us. We have Dan McMean, and Dan lost his son to suicide when he was 25. In 1996, and it was the most devastating, painful event imaginable. The shockwaves caused problems in his marriage, affected his relationship with his daughters, and were damaging to his career. He found that he was less able to function as a mental health professional and was eventually terminated from employment and finished working his working days as a truck driver. The initial shock left him wondering whether he could ever be happy again or whether he even wanted to go on living. As he has told other survivors since, healing comes slowly but surely, and today he's fine and able to enjoy life as well or better than ever. He wants people to know that if they experience a tragic loss, that healing will come with time and patience. Others have said that with the pain of the loss, there's also a gift that will be revealed, and he can say that that has been true for him. Mary Williams has lived in Mount Horeb for 33 years. She has always been actively involved in each of the communities she's lived in. She is a registered nurse. I think a lot of us know Mary. And currently has the position of parish nurse in her church in Mount Horeb, which is St. Michael of the Archangel. She experienced a period of depression when her family moved to Mount Horeb in 1986, and she wanted to share her experience and what helped her to overcome her depression. So that leaves us with 2 moderators, and then I can stop talking. So we have Jess Dahlman, and Jess had a booth out in, I call it the lunchroom because that's what it is during middle school days. Jess is a local licensed professional counselor and mental health consultant who works with people of all ages, genders, and needs. She specializes in trauma therapy, EMDR therapy in particular, infant and family mental health, and nature-based therapies, including equine therapy. Beyond the average person, Jess is equipped to work with LGBTQIA and deaf, hard of hearing populations. Jess also has personal experience as a survivor of a sibling who died by suicide and subsequently works with people navigating traumatic grief. For more information about their work, check out Natural Wisdom Counseling and the Wisconsin Hawthorne Project. This is Jess. And then we have Dr. Joanna Bisgrove. She is a family physician at the SSM Health Dean Clinic in Oregon since 2007. She is the medical advisor to the Oregon Schools District since the fall of 2013. She is a physician member of the Oregon School District Mental Health and Wellness Committee since its inception in the fall of 2013, a physician member of the Oregon School District Wellness Committee and Oregon School District Human Growth and Development Committee, both since fall of 2013.
I think I might be the only physician member of all 3, but
Okay, so with that, I can sit down. I will hand this off to Jess and Joanna, and we will go with questions from there.
Before we begin, I wanted to give, for when we're done, to give everyone maybe a little bit of homework, if you're interested. There is a movie, some of you may have heard about. The director is actually a child psychiatrist in the Madison area. The movie is on Amazon. It is called The Madness and the Mandolin. If anyone wants me to write it down when we're done, I can. The director is a child psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Sean Ackerman. He directed it over a number of years when he was still a psychiatry resident in the University of Vermont. It is about a child with autism who later developed bipolar disorder. Meds did not work for him, so they had to do his treatment through wellness, exercise, eating healthy, and music. His father is a very well-known bluegrass musician in the Northeast. Part of the reason, as we talk about wellness and different ways to approach it in mental health, it's a really interesting movie and story. I will do one personal kind of sort of disclaimer. I've actually known Dr. Ackerman since we were children, and known him since he's always been a wonderful person, a wonderful director. The movie has been really well received, though, and it really does provide a really interesting perspective if anyone's interested. So, with that done, we wanted to start. A lot of this is to be question and answer. I'd like to give the audience, anyone in the audience, a chance to answer a question. As Jenny noted, there are some questions that the panel will choose not to answer, or members of the panel will choose not to answer. But we did want to open the floor. Are there any questions that
You should still feel free to ask them, though. We can always say no, but please feel free to ask.
Please feel free to ask. There is no bad question or stupid question or wrong question. Feel free to ask a question, so the panel reserves the right to say, I'm not comfortable answering that. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Bueller. I am from Chicago, so. All right. So we do have some potential questions that we drew up that we can ask the panel. I'll start with one that I think is important just to think about. So how do you cope when things go bad? What helps you?
Cool. So for me, it took me a while to figure out what works best for me personally. And honestly, the one thing that comes down to is just knowing that, like, I have my family there to support me, and I have a couple friends that I know that regardless of what's going on in my life, like, they'll be there in a heartbeat. I mean, it took a while for me to figure it out, and I'm sure it's like that for all of us. And I mean, there are still days that suck and are difficult, but just having like that support system has just made a world of a difference.
I can second that. I know it's, when I was in crisis last year, my husband knows my quirks pretty well, and he can spot when things are going a little wonky. I call my mom numerous times a day, but just relationships, you know, making sure that even when I feel alone, I know I'm not. They may not know what I'm feeling, they may not feel what I'm feeling, but they're accepting of it as it is. And I know that I can go to them and say, hey, can you just talk me through the next 5 minutes? Or what, you know, the next whatever it is. You know, and when I first told my husband, gosh, 20 years ago? We've been married almost 18, so about 22 years ago probably. I said, you know, this is what I do. And he looked at me and he said, okay. And we moved on. And that's how he's dealt with it ever since. He's there if I need him. He's there if I don't need him. He's just kind of a rock. And it's just those relationship pieces, just being there for somebody, whether you need to actively do anything or not, just being there is huge.
I would agree completely. For me, it's been my husband as well. And I mean, even I think a lot of the times, look at him. A lot of the times I think that I don't recognize it, and he's gotten so good at, you know, picking up on the cues. You know, then he'll come to me and say, "Hey, how are you doing?" And that I think helps kind of. I start to recognize them now. I'm better at it. I see kind of coming, and I'll say, you know, yeah, I agree. Something's up, and you know, you kind of like, do you think you should, you know, catch up with your doctor, or? And then I think just making that connection and then talking to him a lot really helps. Just kind of, I mean, for me, talking has always been just getting it out and verbalizing it. It's a lot of, I think, thinking out loud that helps me.
Yeah.
Kind of
well, it's kind of
get distance from it.
Yeah, it's kind of sharing the weight, but it's not burdening the other person in the same way. So their weight is coming off of you, but it's not necessarily pounding as hard on them.
Yeah.
At least I'm not the spouse of somebody with this, so I can't speak for my husband. But.
Well, I'll say that I was very fortunate that I was working amidst some professionals that were very, very helpful, and just sharing my feelings with them. And they were very, you know, fine people to listen and support me. And I had no feelings of embarrassment about what happened because they were so good to me and listened to me. And I think that's the way that it gets people through. It got me through the hardest point in my life was sharing what happened and not being afraid of judgment.
You had a question?
I did. I wanted to know specifically.
Would you like the microphone?
Do I need a microphone? Would you like me to have one?
Video. Better video.
You bet. Absolutely. So all I remember is that your last name is Brown.
Heidi.
Heidi, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I just wanted to ask you specifically, you said your spouse will cue in to what's going on and ask you, are you okay? How are you doing? Are you always good about saying, like, being really upfront right away? Or are you kind of I'm going to shut down for a little while and I really need him to ask me again and again and keep prodding?
No, I don't think so. I think, and he can speak up if he disagrees. I think I'm pretty good about acknowledging it. I think it's, and I think sometimes I do check in and say, am I doing okay? And that's my spin on it. I mean, but that's not necessarily, you know, it's worked in a way because I'm mired down in it.
If I can add to that a little bit, I know for me, there's a certain perspective that comes with crisis once you're on the other side of it. And over the years, I mean, I've had this almost since second grade, better part of 38 years of my life. And as I grow as a person, there's a certain gratitude that comes with coming out the other side. And with that, there's a certain introspection of how did I do that? And you just start packing your toolbox for the next time. There might be a next time, there might not. But you, at least for me, I learned to go back and evaluate once I'm in a good place to figure out what that is. To figure out, okay, what worked for me? What did I miss? Because last year came out of the blue for me. But as I looked back, I was like, oh, okay. But I don't know that I would have picked up on it had I not gone through the crisis and looked back. So there's a certain amount of introspection and a certain amount of gratitude that comes with coming out the other side that helps a lot.
Did that answer your question?
Anyone else with any follow-up questions? Yes, ma'am.
You asked about shutting down before, and do you have any advice for a parent of a child who does more of the shutdown?
So in my case, as a senior in high school, when I went through my first kind of depressive period, and it was like months and months of me being in this like really horrible, dark place. And the thing that really ended up like helping me, which like I look back now, but it's just my mom like constantly would say like, are you okay? Like, what's going on? And I mean, for a few months, like I said, like, I'm fine, I'm tired, I just need to like be by myself. But there was finally one day that I was just like, no, I'm not okay. And that was just kind of like what started it all, and like me finally getting to a place where I could acknowledge what was going on for me. But again, that was like months and months of like her being like, Caitlin, what's going on? Are you okay? Like, talk to me. So it's just that persistence, I think, was really helpful in my case.
Did it annoy you when she kept asking, or how did you receive it when she was asking before you were ready to?
I mean, I was a teenager, come on.
Did it annoy you in a special way?
I mean, I think like on some level I was pretty irritated about it, but at the same time, like it just showed that like she cared about me, and she could tell that I wasn't okay even when I didn't want to acknowledge it myself. I mean, of course, I was a teenager, so I had to be like, leave me alone. But, you know, when I think about it now, like, I'm really thankful that she was as persistent as she was. And, like, I don't look back and think about, like, how annoyed I was at her asking me those things.
And my mom did something very similar when the twins were 6 months old. She kept saying, Heidi, something's wrong, something's wrong. This isn't normal. And I kept saying, I'm a new mom, I've got 2 babies, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm really tired, I had an emergency C-section that went sideways, and had to deal with that. She said, no, it's not it, it's not it. She kept doing the same thing. She kept saying, you know, something's not right, something's not right. And I think he was seeing it too. And then I finally, the morning I was going to go in for my 6-month checkup, it was just like, yep, something's not right. I'm going to at least talk to her. And the second, like, she said postpartum depression, it was like, I was like, oh wait, lifted off my shoulders. Well, I think chills literally went down my spine.
I know for me, as a kid, nobody knew. And I wasn't about to tell them. And my mom has a lot of guilt over that. She said, God, we didn't know. And I said, I didn't want you to. I carried on, you know, and somehow had the grit to get through it. But nobody was going to know until I was ready for them to know. And I think that's why it's so important that we talk about it, because there will be cases where you can ask and you won't be told. Because the person's either not ready to talk about it, doesn't know how to deal with it. You know, I didn't say anything until my doctor, I had a panic attack. And my brother has an issue, or had an issue with his aortic valve, and so I said, okay, time for an EKG, or echo. And when my doctor came back, he said, everything's fine. I was finally at the point where I said, okay, this is what I do. And he looked at me and he said, we can help that. And I, same thing, just, okay. You know, and I went home and I just sobbed, but not because I was sad that I had some disease, but just like, oh my God, there's relief. There's something that we can do about it. But I had to get to that point. And nobody knew to even ask questions. Because my OCD isn't, my husband might view this differently. It's not especially visible. I have a particular kind that is a lot of routine thoughts. So trying to treat it is like trying to grab smoke. But yeah, nobody would have seen it, nobody would have known until I was ready to say something. So.
In my case, when we moved from I was so involved in our community before moving, and my husband got a new job, so we bought a new house, we lived with my in-laws for a period of time, and just did not have that connection that I always had with people in my previous community. And when I started, recognizing that I was depressed, boy, it scared my family. They still talk about those periods of time and what we did. And it wasn't that I wasn't talking, because I was talking to everybody. It even affected my work performance at the hospital. A couple of co-workers talked to my head nurse. They didn't come to me first. And I think back now, and I wished that they would have had the courage to say, hey, Mary, what's going on? Why are they, because they could see changes in me. And so I went back to them and I said, hey, you guys, don't be afraid to ask, to be concerned when you're seeing this. Because that made me, change my mind and not to be afraid to approach somebody that's having, problems, especially if they're expressing and they're talking and they want to get their feelings out. You just have to be a good listener to be there.
And if you don't ask, they may not know that they can lean on you.
Yeah.
So it's a resource that hasn't approached them yet. They can always say, you're not the person I need to talk to. But it's very hard to say, you are the person I need to talk to if you haven't expressed that security for them.
And I think for me, one of the things that I've learned with my psychologist is one of the ways I exhibit, I know that we know that I'm starting to spiral, is I will isolate myself from my family, from friends, coworkers. And so, one of those tools in the toolboxes is to poke at that. And so, before where I would, finish dinner and go upstairs and hide in a corner and watch TV, now it's, I'm downstairs in the living room. And so it's just, that toolbox of going back and poking at, the symptoms or behaviors and kind of reinforcing, the good stuff and kind of knocking yourself out of the spiral.
For me, what helped most was just getting reinvested into your community again. It takes a while, especially when you're moving. And for me, it was almost like a grieving process, that I had lost all of that connection that I had in my other community. And then I was here just, worrying about the kids getting in school and getting my house set up. What about me? He said I just didn't have the people and I knew so many people. But it took me a while to get re-involved in the community. I got back into the EMS and in my church community and, in the school. It just made, then I had my self-worth back again. I knew that I was the same person, but I went through that period of depression because of that loss.
Even though I'm a moderator, one thing I did notice, the panelists were saying, is talking about how their moms noticed. I will say one thing, physicians are often seen as superhuman. We are human. And there's a massive crisis across the country right now of physician burnout. And a lot of physicians are under stress, anxious, depressed. Physicians are committing suicide at a massive rate. I do a lot of policy work at the national level. It's something we're grappling with. The personal side of this is that I wanted to say is that when I'm struggling with burnout, it's always my dad that notices, not my mom. So, Dad, you are just as important. Never think you're not. And out.
And I would add to that, I've since learned that one of my boundaries now is my mom. I don't share. It's my husband. He sees it. He's the one I talk to.
Jess, I think we got a question up there on your side.
Yeah, I have a question. You said you hid your depression from your mom. Could your friends tell, or did you hide it from them also?
Are you talking about me?
Yeah,
It's all about me. Yes.
Oh, and now he's identified.
Sorry, honey.
So in my case, world in the sense that it can happen to anyone. So when I started going into this depressive period, you know, I had gone like a couple months where like I was just in this awful place, and I finally got to the point where like I decided I was going to tell my best friend at the time that I was feeling like this and I didn't know what to do, and her response was that I was too happy to be depressed. So that kind of shut down that avenue for a little bit. And you know, I think that did kind of keep me from seeking help sooner, I think, but also at the same time, I think if like I had been more open about it, I would have seen that my other friends were dealing with similar situations and they were dealing with similar feelings. You know, once I got into the doctor and I started seeing a counselor and I was on medication, I did talk to one of my other good friends about it, and he was like incredibly understanding. He didn't necessarily get like why I felt the way I did, but he was really supportive, and he tried to be supportive in any way that he could at the time. So since then, now I'm like really open about it, and me and my friends talk about that kind of stuff all the time, which is really nice, and it's something that like I never imagined I would have. So yeah, it was kind of a roller coaster getting to this point, but I feel like I'm happy with where I'm at with my friends now. And you know, me and that person we don't talk anymore, and I think that's okay. You know, not everyone's going to understand what you're going through, not everyone's going to be supportive of it, but if you can find those people that will be a piece of your family, I think that makes a huge difference.
I think it's also important to recognize that that can happen with care providers as well. If it's not a good fit, that's okay. I went in to a therapist when I was about 16, I think, because I always had stomach aches. The anxiety was just in my solar plexus, and I always had a stomach ache, and I didn't know why. And so I went into a therapist, and I remember very clearly, she said, "Has your father ever touched you inappropriate?" And I was like, "No." She said, "How about a brother, an uncle?" I said, "No." She said, "Family friend, grandfather?" I said, "No." And she looked at me, and it's burned into my brain. She said, "There's nothing wrong with you. You don't need to be here." It took another 7 years for me to be diagnosed. If you go somewhere and you see a therapist and you're like, "Oh, they ook me out," or "I'm not comfortable," it's okay to seek out a different professional. Not everybody has the right fit. It's kind of like a classroom teacher. Some fits are good, some aren't. Some healthcare professionals are your match and some aren't. There's nothing wrong with saying, "This isn't a good fit, I need something different." And I don't think any healthcare professional would be offended by that. And saying, "Hey, you need to go find what's right for you." If it's
one of my best friends from college is the PhD in psychology and the head of the counseling center at one of the university on the East Coast. I use her comment all the time. So everyone goes to the shoe store, right? Does every pair of shoes you put on fit? So what do you do if it doesn't? You try another pair of shoes. Same thing. Especially with a therapist. Especially with a therapist. If the fit isn't right, it's not going to work. Doctor, provider, anything, but most particularly with a therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, really super important.
And as a support person, you may need to encourage the person who's having difficulties and help them seek out, if they're comfortable with you doing that, help them and encourage them to seek out a different professional if the first one just shuts them down. It's okay.
I'll just add to that. Generally, if it's not a good fit, we know too. So, you know, it's not, it's real. That a lot of the comments about how people get through or what's worked for them comes down to relationship and who has been able to show up in relationship, and therapy is a relationship too, and no different than like being like, "Oh, my spouse is the best spouse, you should try him out." Like it's not going to work that way, right? So therapists don't work for everyone, and it's really about personal fit.
And those relationships change with time. You may start with a therapist or a physician, and over time you're like, "It's not working anymore." It's okay to change. Parents will choose. We're a family medicine clinic. And so parents will choose physicians for their children. And I see it happen all the time. I've got a child, generally a boy, who gets to adolescence and suddenly I see the backup. And it's the flinch, especially when we get to the private part exam. And I'm like, all right. And then I start talking about my male partners in the clinic, just their personalities, instead of leave it up to them. And then they tell their parents, hey, I want to switch. Same thing, I'll get some adolescent females for the same reason. The relationships change with time as well, and that fit can change with time, and that's okay too.
Questions? There's 2 questions over there.
They're gonna duke it out.
Well, I was waiting.
I was waiting. Okay.
So I think this is really interesting, because I think the same things that we've just said about therapists and physicians and friends and others can be said about medication too. And cycling in and out of medications and finding the right medication at the outset. And so that's a whole different equation. And the question is, how can we best support people who we know are struggling? Let's set the therapist, physician part of the equation aside and say the real struggle now for this, our example, is we can't find the right medication or the right combination of medication. They've just been diagnosed 6-8 months ago, and it's still a struggle. How do we support you through that? Or even worse, you've been on a medication for 6 or 8 years, and then something goes sideways, and you got to find a new one because your body's not doing what it needs to with that. So how do we help you with that?
So for me, so my psychiatrist that I'm seeing now, I got to a point with him summer of 2017 where he said, Heidi, I want you to make a list. This is your homework. Make a list of every medication you've been on since the twins were born for depression. And it was depression, it was anxiety, and so there was a lot. And the list came up to be somewhere between 30 and 40, not just antidepressants, but there were a lot of more antidepressants, and there were a lot of, I think I've tried pretty much every permutation. So for me it was, the medication was hit or miss, but it was in parallel working with a therapist. And finally for me, I think it was the ECT that helped. But there's a lot of other options out there, and I think there are things coming out, what is it, like TMS or something? Some therapy. I mean, there's lots of other options out there, and it's not just all about medication. You know?
And for some people, medication doesn't work.
It doesn't work at all, yeah.
And that's just not their route. And I mean, these are our experiences, but we're only 5 people.
Yeah.
You know, and whatever your path is, it's your path.
Yep.
Whatever you feel, you feel.
Yep.
Whatever works for you, works for you. And
medication isn't the only answer.
no, it's not.
And it's not, it doesn't have to be just one thing either. It shouldn't be just one medication.
Yeah.
I mean, at least for me personally, I mean, everybody's different, but
Yeah.
I had other things going on, you know, from my past that I had to deal with in addition, and just kind of things worked in parallel, so.
I'll just say that for me it wasn't medication, it wasn't the right therapist, but it was taking a reassessment of my life and even my marriage that I was in that really actually helped me come out the other side a happier person.
And I think that's a really good point too, because in 2017 it was, you know, my crisis. I took the month off from work, which meant I had to share with my boss and his boss what was going on. My boys were sophomores. November 2017 rolled around. I had been to work for 2 weeks and got the email and went. And I was supposed to go to yoga because that was one of my things, was I was doing yoga because it's a good active thing, myself, you know, mind at ease. And I got the email that got sent out and I went, you know, this doesn't feel right. I'm going home to check on Jack and Noah. And it was just a whole reprioritization for me of work is not what's most important. Working weekends and evenings, not most important, it doesn't matter. It's the 4 people I live with.
And you're talking about when they lost their classmate?
Yeah, matter. Yeah. So yes, reprioritization.
Can I comment on what Rod the question he asked? Is that acceptable?
Trying
As
not
long
to
as-
answer back and forth to each other.
You did say that, yes, I'm sorry.
So your question was about how do we support people when medications aren't working, or going through that process of change. I'm going to rephrase that for the panel, because part of what happens when we are really invested in medication is that we aren't tolerating the pain that's in front of us. So what do you all need to be able to let people bear your pain with you? How do you enter into that vulnerable space? How do people show up for you in a way that you can trust them with your pain? Regardless of whether it's about medication not working, or having a not good therapy session, or just something going sideways.
Listen, patience, hugs, for me.
Just the courage to approach people and let them know that you want to confide in them, and if they aren't willing to hear it, then move on to the next person, and be courageous, and don't worry about stigma at all. Just go forward.
Don't tell me to pull myself up by my bootstraps.
Yeah, and for me, it was just being there. For whatever reason, I've always been able to be very open since I was diagnosed, and be able to talk about it. But let me talk about it without trying to fix it. What I do and what I think, and when I'm in crisis, it's not logical. And to a brain that's not going through the same thing, trying to understand it, there is no understanding it. So just let me talk it out. Don't judge it. Don't try to fix it. That's not your role. Your role is just love and support and being there. With my husband and my mom, just them being there, they didn't have to say anything. They didn't have to do anything. Just them being there was huge for me.
Unconditional love.
Yeah. You know, and I didn't care if they were watching a movie or, they didn't even have to be interacting with me. Just knowing that they were there, that they were present, that they were invested, and committed to the relationship that we have was a big piece for me. Without trying to say, okay, we'll try this, try this, try this, try this, try this. I've tried a million things and it's like, I'm going nuts, shut up. But just not trying to fix it. Just letting it be what it is and accepting that.
But not give up on us.
No, not give up on
Right.
it. Yeah. But just not try to be the one to fix it, because that's not what I'm looking to them for. Yeah.
And I've had a couple of situations. In fact, one was with my brother. When our next brother, when he died, my younger brother went into depression because he had unresolved issues with his brother. And when he realized this, I went to him and I said that, it takes courage to acknowledge, that something's wrong and that you're doing something about it. And so it's helpful to be encouraging to those people that are realizing, hey, something's not right, and to encourage them to get help. And and it's just, you need to do that. You need to, be able to be supportive of those people and tell them that it's you're showing such a positive sign by recognizing it and wanting to get help.
And I think tagging on to that, once somebody is in recovery, it's not just, recovery isn't a concrete thing. You can be in recovery and have 2 great days and have one really sucky day. So being there for people, acknowledging, like she said, the positive steps, but also being there and say, hey, you know what? You had a really crappy day. You've done a lot of good work and you'll get back there. Encouraging, accepting, acknowledging, and not just going, okay, well, you got through that, we're done, I don't need to be here. Stick with them. Stick with them. It leaves a particular scar, that is painful for a long time.
Be a good listener.
Listen more than you talk.
You need to be a good listener. So much.
Even if it doesn't make any sense what's coming out of their mouth.
So as a community then, how do we become better listeners? You know what I'm saying? Like, so much of my attending here is because of a relationship, and we speak about relationships. So the community relationship to the professionals, to the citizens, from school to residents, you know, what more can we do to shine a spotlight on it without shining the spotlight on it and, you know, breaking somebody, or, you know what I'm saying? Just to, it seems like it's a tippy toe, but it's something that we gotta do. So as a community, what more is there that you would want to see being done?
I would love to see it in the schools from a very early age.
Yes.
And, you know, one of the goals of the community came forward as one of the top 3 priorities from the meeting last August was play-based kindergarten. And I think I shared when I told my story to the board that it sounds brutal, but it doesn't matter if a kid can read if they're dead. They have got to have that social, emotional piece, that foundation to build on. The academics will come. But if we push academics and they're not socially, emotionally ready to handle the stress that comes with that, it won't matter. And a kid is going to learn better if they're comfortable, if they can identify their feelings, if they can communicate their feelings. Then they're good. Then their stress isn't about who they are and how everybody views them. Then their stress is about, man, I cannot get algebra. Okay? Because I can't get algebra. I'm a geometry kid. But we have to have that foundation, and it has to start very, very early. And as a community, we need to, I think, push for that in our school system, and then carry it on through. Don't just say, okay, got that out of the way in 4K in kindergarten, now let's push this, now let's test on this, now let's test on this. No, it carries forward. It becomes a core piece of the curriculum.
In the Oregon School District, we have our general philosophy, or our overarching curriculum is called the Whole Child, and it integrates social emotional learning and creates what you talked about, shining the spotlight without shining the spotlight. It's a process. Everything is, we have processes in place. We have a sort of a wraparound approach in place so that, and we have different tiers. And the mental health wellness committee and the school board have invested. But what happened is we have our baseline, our tier 1, which is very just wellness driven, making sure kids have activity breaks, making sure there is the social emotional learning curriculum, and constantly looking for best practices. And then we go up, making so the next level, we started that first, and then we build up the next ground level, which was to, okay, how do I identify the kids who need help? And then the next level up is we have our local community therapists can go into the school, and we've gotten both the Dean Health Plan, UW, and other health insurance plans to take the feedback to agree to allow for the health insurances. So kids who families either are nervous about going to see a therapist with their family member, or there's just not time, can go see the therapist within the school. They only need to go to the first appointment with their parents, so the parent can sign off on it and understand the program. But we keep building those levels, and so there's this all-encompassing approach. And that way we've been able to shine the spotlight without shining it on an individual. There's a place for a child to go at every angle. It's taken years for us to do it, but that's how we've approached it. Every community is different in how they do it, but that's kind of how you do it. You build the structure. That's at least how we've done it. You build the structure in the background. And we've been very proud of the work that we do. But that's the suggestion of a way to approach it, is that you build the structure for the kids and for the community and shine the light on the whole system so that everybody can be enveloped, and then you don't single anyone out.
So we are at our 5-minute warning, less than 5 minutes left of the panel. So I'm going to jump in here really quick and redirect to, is there anything that you've been all thinking about or that's come up, like burning things that you want to make sure that you tell the audience?
I do. So I think what the Mount Horeb School District has done in the last 2 years almost has been monumental. And I think to the question you were asking, it doesn't stop in the schools. It's not just the schools. It's community-wide. And it's education, and it's not, it's not something that, happened in your past, and it's a disease. it's a chemical imbalance, and that education needs to be there, the stigma needs to be removed, and I think that's my opinion, done through events like this, and communication and teaching, and it's not just the schools, it's the adults and the communities. And
be the one who's willing to stand up, be the first one to talk about it. You know, be willing to say, okay, everybody's gonna be quiet. I mean, when I first told my story, I think those few kids, it was crickets after I got done talking. But I saw this transformation in people of, oh my God, she just talked about that.
Yeah.
To, oh my God, she just talked about that. You know, and it took a bit. But you know, like Heidi said, doing things like this and being willing to stand up and say, okay, let's talk about that, instead of just being part of the crowd and going, nobody else is talking about it? Okay, maybe now's not the time. It's always the time. It's always the time,
and not just in the schools, I feel like.
Yeah.
You know, we met in August, I think that was. And I thought that was a really great event, but I kind of walked out of there feeling like, well now what?
Yeah.
You know, and it was all kind of like circled back into the schools, and so again, I think it's a lot more, you know, it seems like we've got a good basis in the schools, and now, you know, if we can do more in the community for the, you know, the adults and the parents. And
yeah, I think, is this the first community goal that's actually been able to come to full fruition? Yeah. So I mean, it does take time, but
yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, it hasn't, I think others kind of walked up to it that same, you know, after that meeting at the bank, and we were kind of like,
what do I do?
Now what? I thought we were going to get involved. And
how do I activate that?
Yeah.
I would just say that I think the overall health of the community is really the target for me, and I think the younger the children, it's more important at that age. And I think in terms of child abuse as being really paramount, and if we see child abuse or suspect child abuse of our neighbor or ourselves, get help for the child. And that's, I think, a big boost for the health of the community. And I know it takes years and years to, I think for someone to become depressed enough to commit, I should say, take their own life, I think the way that to approach that is very, very early.
I think one other thing I'd like to say is that when a person gets to the point of taking their own life, it's not because they're weak. In my case, and I didn't attempt it, but it was a near thing, I was so exhausted from dealing with day in and day out something that I couldn't put down. And there is a weight that goes with acknowledging you need help. And in my case, I was so exhausted, but I knew that coming out the other side would take so much work and so much strength. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave my family. I didn't want to leave my kids. I want to see my kids grow up and get married and have families of their own. But I was so tired, I had nothing left in the tank. And my medicine kicked in when it kicked in, thank God. But it wasn't because I was weak in character. It wasn't because I was selfish. I don't think anybody wants to do that. And if they do, I think there's another piece, you know, that's playing a part there, but I don't think anybody wants that to be the option that they choose. It certainly wasn't for me. But I have nothing else left.
Completely agree.
It's 8 o'clock. You didn't get to say a last comment, did you? Was there something burning?
I agree completely. I think that you guys touched on pretty much everything that I was thinking.
Thank you all so much for sharing.
And thank you, Minnow, for coming. Seeing our community take part in things like this gives me hope.
Yes. Yes.